Hey guys, welcome back to another video. This is Troy with Cichlid Bros, and in today's video we're walking through a top 20 list of the most peaceful cichlids that you'll find in the hobby today. Really excited to talk about them, so let's dive right in. So before we get into the list, it's important to note that cichlids do have a reputation of being very aggressive, and that can be very true sometimes. It just depends a lot on the species you get, the tank setup, the tank mates, the tank size. All those factors can go into how aggressive a fish is. However, in this top 20 list, these are the most relatively peaceful that you will find, but even some at the top of the list could be considered aggressive if you're comparing it to something like a neon tetra or just some really peaceful community fish. I do think a lot of the fish on this top 20 could be kept in a community setting because they are relatively peaceful. However, almost all of these cichlids will get aggressive if they pair up and start breeding in your tank, so definitely keep that in mind if you have a male and female that form a pair. And it's also important to note that almost all these species, even the most peaceful, could have a rogue individual. All cichlids have their own personality and can be aggressive depending on the circumstance. But with all that being said, let's go into number 20. So number 20 on the list is the rainbow cichlid. And rainbow cichlids are pretty underrated fish in the hobby in my opinion. They are Central American cichlids that don't get too big. They stay probably under 5 inches in total length, and they get some really cool orangish yellow, brown color. And for the most part, they are relatively peaceful. They come in at number 20 because they can be pretty feisty in certain setups if they're trying to hold their own, or especially when they get into breeding mode. I would say they're a pretty good alternative to another Central American cichlid, the convict, which is extra feisty and aggressive. The rainbow cichlid stays that smaller to medium size like the convict, but it doesn't get as aggressive, and even if it is breeding, it is not quite as bad as the convict. And I really like the color pattern to the rainbow, so that's why it's coming in at number 20. And number 19 on the list might surprise you because it is an African cichlid, specifically an Ambuna, the Yellowtail Ambuna. These fish get some really cool bluish purple color throughout their body with some yellow fins, and they get pretty big for an Ambuna, up to about 6 inches, but when it comes to the really feisty Ambuna cichlids, the Yellowtail Ambuna is a little bit different. I haven't seen it be quite as aggressive or boisterous as some of the other Ambuna species, and even though it gets slightly larger than some of the other Ambuna, it really doesn't dominate anyone in the tank. It's usually the one that you need to watch out for of maybe being picked on. But I do think this species is on the more peaceful end of the spectrum, especially when it comes to African cichlids. And if you have an Ambuna tank or a Lake Malawi tank, I don't think this species will be the one that's giving you trouble. Number 18 on the list might be one of my favorite cichlids in the entire hobby. That's the Geopagus Finis. And when it comes to Geopagus, which are all earth-eating cichlids from South America, I think this Fini is one of the more peaceful ones. Even when they have been breeding for me, they don't really attack other fish, they just kind of gently push them away. But it also takes them quite a long time to grow into their full adult stage, so most of the time that you'll have them, they won't be their full size and they won't be too dominant in the tank. And I've also just noticed that they're not as aggressive as some other Geopagus species like the Steindackneri or the Braziliensis, which can be pretty aggressive. The Spini stays on the more peaceful end again on that spectrum, and you also get the amazing coloration and patterns along their body with the spiked dorsal fin and the elongated fins. It's just an amazing cichlid that could go well in groups or go with a lot of different South American community setups, especially other South American cichlids, so that's why it's on the list at number 18. Number 17 on the list is actually a cichlid species I just got in my fish room, which is the Juliachromis. And there are multiple types of Juliachromis. They are Lake Tanganyikan cichlids that have an elongated body, kind of like a torpedo shape, and they love to be within rockwork, kind of in nooks and crannies of their caves where they can hide out from others. And that peaceful nature, as long as they have those rock caves, they really aren't too aggressive to others. They're not going to go all over the tank and kind of assert their dominance. They'll kind of lay back in that rockwork and just kind of chill. I have the Juliachromis ornatus, which has some really cool black color patterns along their body, and as they mature they get more yellow as well. So truly stunning fish with a really unique body shape, and because they aren't too aggressive, I think it's a really good option, especially if you're going to set up any type of Lake Tanganyikan community tank. You could do shell dwellers, calvus, cyprichromis. You could put some of those medium to small size fish in a Tanganyikan tank with them, and they would be a great option for you. Number 16 on the list is another African cichlid. It is an Ambuna species again, the rusty cichlid. And when it comes to Ambuna species, this is one of the most peaceful you will find. However, like I said with the Yellowtail Ambuna, it can be aggressive, especially if you put them with the incorrect tank mates. And I promise this is one of the last African cichlids on the list because they are known to be on the more aggressive end, but rusty cichlids themselves really aren't, and they're underrated in my opinion because they have some maroon, brown, and even hints of bluish purple throughout their body that kind of makes them a unique looking Ambuna. And if you have a lot of different colored Ambuna in your tank, the rusty cichlid can make a really good complement. They would also be great together in just a species group, like a colony where you're breeding them and just letting them show off their natural behavior with a lot of rock work. And they could also go well with number 15 on the list, which is the last Lake Malawi cichlid, I promise. It is the Yellow Lab, and I think the Yellow Lab is probably the most peaceful when it comes to Lake Malawi cichlids. They really stick to their own. They can hold their own against like the Johanni or a Radis or some of those really aggressive Ambuna, but the Yellow Lab stays a little bit more to itself, and it really doesn't assert dominance in the tank, especially if it's a Lake Malawi tank. And Yellow Labs are very popular for good reason, because they are relatively peaceful when it comes to a cichlid, and because they get that bright yellow pop of color with an awesome trim of black on their dorsal fin, and there's even some with a little bit of electric blue spangling along their fins. So I absolutely love the Yellow Lab. I think it's a perfect cichlid, especially for a beginner if you're trying to get into African cichlids. I think the Yellow Lab is a perfect option. And then coming in at number 14 on the list are Discus, which are obviously some of the most beautiful cichlids on the planet today. Some really great color patterns, and their body shape is very unique. They usually peacefully swim across the tank. They really utilize the top and bottom of a tank, and they can even go in some community tank setups as long as those fish can withstand some higher temperatures, because Discus usually like their temperature around 82 to 84 degrees Fahrenheit, which is a little bit high for some community fish, but you could do things like cardinal tetras or rummy nose tetras, some corydoras, and there are some other peaceful cichlids that you can maybe put in with Discus as well. A very large Discus probably won't attack some of those really small tetras, so you could get a really cool mix of sizes of fish in your aquarium when it comes to Discus. They can be a little feisty towards each other if you don't have the right mix of males, females, or group size in general, but for the most part they're just a very elegant, slow swimming, and peaceful cichlid, which is very similar to the next one on the list, the Angelfish. Angelfish again utilize the top and bottom of the tank. They're a little taller of a fish, but angelfish are an absolute staple in the hobby, one of my all-time favorite cichlids. You get so many different color varieties, and I just love their demeanor and how they don't attack smaller fish for the most part, and they can even hold their own against some bigger cichlids. I've seen them kept in tanks with things like a green terror and Oscar, which obviously isn't ideal for the angelfish, but they can hold their own without being too boisterous towards the community type fish. I've had a lot of success keeping angelfish with things like Geopagus, electric Blueara, and Severums, but they could definitely go with smaller fish like corydoras, rummy nose tetras, loaches, and all those community fish will probably be okay with angelfish. They aren't higher on the list because they can be a little bit more aggressive when they're in breeding mode. I had that happen in my tank where they had laid eggs and they were really protective of the eggs and their fry when they hatch. So just keep that in mind with angelfish, that they can usually be completely fine, but if they do pair up, they can be pretty aggressive if they're protecting their fry. Coming in at number 11 on the list is the Waloo cichlid. I think Waloo are one of the most underrated cichlids in the hobby today. They are South American cichlids that get pretty large. Mine right now are about 8 to 9 inches, and they get tall bodied as well. But mine have been super peaceful, never even chasing away another fish. And I have heard of other fish keepers having an opposite experience with the Waloo, but usually when I see that situation, I look at their tank and it's too small, because these fish do get really large. So as long as you have a large tank and you have appropriate tank mates like bigger South American cichlids like your Oscar, your chocolate cichlid, something like that, they will usually be the most peaceful in that tank setup. And I just love their large size and the unique pattern on them, and obviously the bright red eye that comes along with it. Number 10 on the list is the Satanapagurari, which is mistakenly called the Geopagus Finis. It has been reclassified to be Satanapagurari, and one of their common names is the Demon Earth Eater, which I think has been another mistake, because these guys are really peaceful. When it comes to the Geopagus type of cichlids, this is the most peaceful in my opinion. This would not have hurt a fly. It is usually a very calm cichlid, even if it is in breeding mode or paired up in the tank. And like similar Geopagus species, they are earth eaters, so they'll sift through the substrate if you have sand, getting any uneaten food or kicking up debris, so they're cleaning your substrate. And they kind of have an elongated body with a spiked dorsal fin, which is really cool. I love the Juliachromis. I think, again, a lot of these fish are underrated on the list because they're just very cool, unique, or peaceful in this case. And we're going to sneak one more African cichlid onto this list, but it's not from Lake Malawi, it's from Lake Tanganyika, and that is the shell dweller, specifically the Neolamprologus multifasciatus, commonly called the multi. And there are a handful of different species of shell dwellers. Some of them can be a little more feisty and aggressive, like the gold ocellatus for instance, but the multis, which I had for about 5 years, they established a huge colony, they breed in their shells, they make homes, it's a really unique behavior, and they really don't attack each other at all or even go after little babies in the tank that are just poking out of the shells. It is really cool to watch just a huge colony grow in your tank, and it was a really rewarding tank for a long time for me. They are also the world's smallest cichlids, so even if you have a rogue individual, there's pretty limited harm they could do in your tank, so for all those reasons, the multi comes in at number 9. Number 8 on the list is one I would like to see become more popular in the hobby, which is the golden eye cichlid. And this is a good alternative if you don't want to keep an Aistogramma and you want something similar to that. The male basically looks like a small electric Blueara. They don't get more than about 3.5 inches. The females get a little bit smaller, get some black splotchy coloration, and maybe some goldish brown along their body as well. They get their name obviously because they have the golden eye, and I just think they are really underrated because they do stay pretty small. They're dwarf cichlids, you don't need a massive tank, and the only real aggression you might get is the male towards the female. When they're in breeding mode, they can be really feisty towards each other. You can see my male kind of flares up whenever he seems like he wants to breed, but when they've been in tanks with other fish, they are super peaceful and calm, and that's with other barbs or tetras or plecos, just smaller fish. They're definitely a great option when it comes to community tanks. Next on the list is one I just mentioned. It is the Aistogramma, which a lot of the characteristics of the golden eye cichlid could be said about the Aistogramma. They are relatively peaceful except when they're in breeding mode, but even that, if you have a pair of Aistogramma breeding in a community tank, usually they will kind of hide out maybe in like a overhang or within decor, so they're guarding that little area but not too aggressive towards the rest of the tank mates. Aistogramma are amazing South American dwarf cichlids that come again in a lot of varieties, a lot of really bright colors and some really cool fins. I love the cockatoides, I love the magmasteri. There's a lot of varieties to choose from, and all of them in my experience have been peaceful. Number 6 on the list is the Checkerboard cichlid, which is another South American cichlid, another dwarf cichlid, and they get an elongated body shape with kind of that checkerboard pattern, and the males get some really cool color pop and extensions to their tail and dorsal fins, so I can't wait for my group here to mature a little bit more. They're almost there, but the males still have maybe another ½ inch to grow and color up, but overall they are not too aggressive. They could definitely go in community type tanks. As long as you don't have bigger cichlids in there that would bully the checkerboards, I think they're a great option for you, and because they don't get too big, you probably only need like a 20-gallon tank, maybe even a 29-gallon tank, and you could definitely keep a small group of these or even just one as kind of a centerpiece if you have other smaller tetras, barbs, and bottom feeders. Number 5 on the list is the German Blue Ram, which is one of the most colorful cichlids from South America. I love the color pop to them, and they don't get very large, so you don't need a massive tank to be able to keep them without aggression issues. The only thing to note about German Blue Rams is they can be a little bit more finicky or hard to keep, so maybe you need to be an intermediate or maybe an advanced fish keeper to really have them thriving in your tank. You may need to increase your temperature a little bit to keep them more effectively, but if you get those things right, they're an awesome fish to keep with great color and obviously that calm demeanor. Coming in at number 4 on the list might be a surprise, but I will die on this hill. It is the electric Blueara. If you know me, I've kept so many electric Blueara. I've gone through the full breeding process with them. I had hundreds of babies one time with a pair, and even through that breeding process, they weren't overly aggressive. As long as you have a big enough tank and appropriate tank mates, they are not an aggressive cichlid at all, and they can hold their own against bigger cichlids like Oscars with no issue. So because of those reasons, I would say the electric Blueara, kept in the right way, is definitely one of the most peaceful cichlids you could keep. I would say the main problem if you run into aggression with this fish is if you're keeping them with really nano fish Of course, every cichlid is going to be opportunistic feeders, and the electric blue acara will be the same way, but as long as you have a medium to larger size tetra, barb, or other community fish, there should be no issues whatsoever, even when the electric blue acara are in breeding mode. Almost every time someone has come to me and said that they actually are aggressive, I look at their tank and it's way too small, or they have the wrong tank mates. So as long as you do the research and you have them in an appropriate home, they are going to be one of the most calm, peaceful cichlids you will find. Number 3 on the list is the Dwarf Flag cichlid, and I absolutely love this guy. Another really underrated South American cichlid. Can go in a really nice planted aquascape tank. It won't eat your plants. It won't go after smaller fish most of the time, and they just calmly swim throughout the tank with a really unique pattern and color to them. Even their head is a little bit of a unique shape, so I really like the Dwarf Flag cichlid. I think it's a great option if you're looking for something that isn't going to be too aggressive and can even grow into that 3.5 to 4 inch cichlid that could be the centerpiece of something like a 40-gallon breeder tank. Number 2 on the list is the Bolivian Ram. And very similar to the German Ram, they are very peaceful cichlids, but the Bolivian Ram, I would say, is much hardier and they are much easier to keep. They can withstand a lot of beginner mistakes and still survive some of that, and you can keep them with a lot of community fish, and they don't get too big, so something like a 20 or 29-gallon tank could be sufficient for one. I have 3 of them in a 40-gallon breeder right now with cherry barbs and a few other cichlids, some plecos. They also are really good in a planted tank, so some of these in the top 10 are pretty good planted tank options as well. I'll leave a link to a full video I did on a top 10 list for planted tanks and cichlids that you could check out later. And the Bolivian Ram gets some great color patterns to them. Sometimes they're outshone by the German Blue Ram, which is very colorful, but I really like the coloration on the Bolivian Ram, and for all those reasons I would definitely recommend them. And then coming in at number 1 on the list and the most peaceful cichlids you will ever find, I think, is the Keyhole cichlid. Keyhole cichlids get their name from the coloration on their body. They are mostly a tannish, yellowish brown fish with a stripe by its eye and a keyhole dot on their body, so that is how they get their common name. But they are extremely docile cichlids that only get about 4.5, maybe 5 inches, and they do great in a community style tank, especially if you have medium to smaller cichlids or you just have community fish. They will keep to themselves, they will not attack anything. They are great in a planted tank, and because they don't get too big, again, you don't need a massive tank. You could probably put one in a 40-gallon breeder or 55-gallon tank for sure, along with some other fish, and have a really nice community. And it's funny, I've seen them in breeding mode and you couldn't even tell because they weren't really protecting their fry or their babies. They're just that calm and docile that I really don't think you'll ever have issues keeping the Keyhole cichlid and having any types of aggression whatsoever. But because of that, they come in at number 1 on our top 20 list of most peaceful cichlids ever. And real quickly, just a couple honorable mentions, including the Biotodoma or the Cupid cichlid, the Severum cichlid, the Crebensis, maybe even the Festivum. I think all these cichlids, they do have a case to be on this list. I think I covered as much as I could, but if I did not mention a cichlid that you think is very peaceful, definitely leave those down in the comment section. Thanks again for watching, everyone. We'll see you next time.